All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the forces that really shape human resource management, and we're going to put one of those forces under the microscope, the trade union. This quote really hits the nail on the head. It's a great way to think about it, right? HR isn't just sitting in an office somewhere. It's out there on the open ocean, constantly navigating all these different currents and winds of influence. So, to help us navigate, here's our game plan for today. We'll start big with the major environmental forces. Then we'll zoom right into the company itself, the internal environment, and really dig into trade unions. After that, we'll look at outside pressures and wrap up with how the whole HR landscape is changing. Okay, first things first. If you really want to get how HR works, you've got to understand the world it lives in. And according to the sources, that world is basically split into two big zones of influence. And here they are. It's a pretty clear split, right? You've got the internal environment, that's everything happening inside the company, and then you have the external environment, all the stuff happening outside in the wider world that still affects the business. So let's start by looking inside the organization's walls. We're going to explore those key internal factors that really mold and shape HR policies from the inside out. Okay, so when you look inside a company, there's a bunch of stuff that influences HR, right? You've got the company culture, its policies, all that. But for our purposes today, we're going to laser focus on one that's been a huge player historically, and as we're about to find out, one that's really changing, and that's trade unions. So let's get into it. What exactly is a trade union's role inside a company? How do they actually work with, or sometimes against, the HR department? Well, at its most basic level, a trade union is all about collective power. It's an organization that's formed by the workers, for the workers. Their whole reason for being is to look out for the employees' interests. It's really interesting when you look at just how tangled up unions are with the day-to-day work of HR. I mean, look at this. We're talking recruitment, training, paychecks, handling disputes, pretty much the whole shebang. It's all stuff that often has to be done in partnership, or let's be honest, sometimes in conflict with the union. But of course, a company doesn't exist in a bubble. So now let's step outside the building and take a look at those big external forces that are always pushing and pulling on HR. The economy is a huge one, right? The number of people available to work, what skills are in demand, all of that determines how hard a company has to fight for good people. And then you've got things like inflation, which the sources point out can directly lead to things like cost of living pay raises that have to be negotiated. And it's the same with politics and the law. You can think of this as the rule book for the whole game. The government creates laws about everything, from who you can hire to how safe your workplace has to be. HR doesn't get to make these rules up. They have to play within those boundaries, period. Okay, so we've seen the forces inside the company and the forces outside. Now let's pull back for the big picture, because what the research suggests is that this whole map of influence, well, it's changing, and changing in a big way. And this right here is the pivot point. According to a 2018 study, things like labor unions and employment laws, they're actually being downgraded in academic research. Think about that. The traditional heavy hitters are getting less attention, which tells you the focus, both in universities and in boardrooms, is starting to go somewhere else. So that begs the obvious question, right? If the spotlight is moving off of unions, where is it moving to? Where is all that energy and, let's face it, all that money being redirected? Well, follow the money. Look at this number, $15.4 billion. That's the projection for the global diversity, equity, and inclusion market. That is a ton of cash, and it's often funding things like employee resource groups, or ERGs. These are groups started by employees inside the company to build a more inclusive workplace. Which brings us to our final big question. As the power of traditional unions seems to be fading in some areas, are things like DEI programs and these ERGs becoming the new unions? Are they the new influential bodies that are going to shape the future of how employees and employers relate to each other? And if they are, what does that mean for the future of HR? Something to think about.